fork doesn't damp, they've double damped this cartridge, which is, again, just not good. When you try and make a small damping unit like that do twice as much work as any other damping unit in the world, it invariably has internal problems trying to create that much force to control the front end. So basically your Goldwing, almost anybody, if you've got a stock Goldwing, you have front tire cupping problems, no matter what brand you use. Tire cupping is not part of a motorcycle's natural life. There's people who just go, bikes, no, front tires always cup. It's only true if the suspension isn't working properly. You can absolutely make tires not cup with proper working suspension. There was somebody here, didn't you say you went 16,000 miles on a front? 16.5. He had an 06 he brought to us. He went 16.5 and took the tire off, no cupping, right? The shop wanted to know what he did, and he didn't want to tell him. But basically, just like if you had a blown shock on your car, you're going to get some weird feathered tire wear. Okay, it's absolutely not part. And your goal isn't to try and, in my mind, my goal isn't to say, hey, now you can take your Goldwing tire and drive it 25,000 miles. It just means that the tire is more uniform and round in the amount of time you want to service it, right? In your service interval, you're going to have a smooth, round tire. It's going to ride better. It's going to feel better, provide better braking, provide better cornering, everything about it. So the idea is to keep the tire nice, and for sure, having proper working suspension will do that. In the routine maintenance, roughly people ask, how long should it be before I get in and do something? As you know, I think around 2005 or so, Honda no longer has a recommended service interval for the front suspension on a Goldwing. They just tell you don't need to ever change the oil. And there are people that ask a legitimate question. They say, well, it's not an engine. There's no combustion, right? It's just stuff moving around. Why would it ever be bad? Well, there's basically bare aluminum parts and stuff's rubbing up and down a million times inside the fork. These are bushings that you've heard of that wear out. They're Teflon coated. The Teflon's wearing off and dropping in the oil. They're literally rubbing on aluminum. If you just take a rag on aluminum and rub it, the rag will turn black. That's oxidation, and there's all of that entering your oil. Springs rubbing on the tubes. See how the spring is guided by the tube it sits in? The metal on the spring literally flakes. Spring steel sheds, and that metal drops down in your oil. There's all kinds of contamination in your fork oil. And we've done them at 5,000 miles. We had a Goldwing come with 5,000 miles on it, and particularly left fork with the damper rod from the factory. The oil is just black. It's trashed. So at 20,000 miles, we recommend having your forks gone through. And obviously that's not a cheap proposition, and it's not always hard. You're not always conveniently located. You just need to kind of keep that number in mind. And I'll show you one of the real mechanical reasons for wanting to have that done. The Teflon bushings that the two halves slide together on, they wear. And we found on the Goldwing that, whoops, you want to catch that for me? There we go, coming back. The Teflon bushings wear. This is the inner one. The upper ones tend to last twice as long as the lower ones, but the Teflon wears off, and instead of being gray like that, you'll see a shiny copper color. And these are probably hard to see from where you're sitting, but all the Teflon's gone from this. And actually, these are out of Jamie's bike. He'd only put a little over 17,000 miles on the bike, and these are both worn out. So as this Teflon wears off, there's additional slack created in the legs. Now, as everybody knows, there's a constant battle to control Goldwings from wobbling, and with your hands off the bars, right? So for sure, mechanical slop in the system will help a bike wobble. I'm not saying it's the only thing, but it's certainly one thing. So, with people that drive or bike 50,000 miles and have never been in the forks, they'll move. You can grab the leg and move it. They'll be so worn out. You can grab the fork leg and move it on the tube. And that slack gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It never gets smaller. It only gets bigger over time. So I say it's absolutely underestimated and underrated how important it is to get in there and have a look. And I don't think a lot of people know that. So when we were wingding this year, we actually took oil out of a bike with 4,000 miles and left it on the table because people just can't believe how bad the oil is. So we tend to like to show people if they're around, if you're in a shop and we happen to be working on your bike while you're here, we love to show people the oil because they just can't believe it's so awful. Never mind the smell, and it's terrible. You know, some Goldwings, we've had one, I think the worst one we ever had was 75,000 miles. Nobody ever worked on it, and it cleared the shop out. You know, it was awful. Couldn't hardly breathe. So the routine maintenance is important, regardless of the upgrades you get. If you leave your bike absolutely stone stock, at 20,000 miles, you should have somebody get in there and put new oil in it and change the bushings, or check the bushings for sure. But I can promise you the lower ones will be worn out. And put some seals in. Fork seals, no way to predict how long they last. Some people, they last 50,000 miles. Some people, they last 15 and they have a problem. There's a lot of things that make seals leak, but it's a piece of rubber sliding on a piece of metal a million times, and it wears out. So one of the things that'll get you is stuff sticking on it, bugs, things. You know, if you're at the hotel or the campground at night, just stick your head into there while you're checking if you're checking your tire pressure, make it a habit to look at your fork tubes. If there's anything on them, a bug or anything stuck to it and splattered on it, it'll wipe out your seal. So try and scratch it off, or keep something with you to wipe it off. Honda polish works really good on bugs, as some of you probably already found out. Honda polish is a miracle product. I love that stuff. And but just try and keep them clean, mainly the tube clean. You'll see if your fork starts leaking, okay, you do want to get it repaired as quickly as possible. Waiting is bad. Even if, say, you're out on the road and you can't get to a dealer, try and find some way to, we call them diapers at the racetrack, put some way to securely wrap some sort of a thick paper towel or a rag, and then tape so it can't get, interfere with anything. The object is to stop the oil from leaking into your brake system until you can get to a shop and have it repaired. A bike will still stop if you get oil in the brakes, and it'll still stop pretty good, believe it or not. But just what happens when the fork oil gets into the brake pads, they're contaminated forever. You can't clean them. The pads are porous. You can try and clean them, but as you use the brakes, they get hot. The oil comes out of the pad, gets back on the rotor. You just keep making a big mess. So if you ever get fork oil on the brake pads, tell the dealer. The dealer will probably suggest you, if they're a good mechanic, to change the pads as well. So that's most of it for the forks as to what comes and what goes wrong. Now the upgrade, our big upgrade that some of you have heard about and some of your friends might have, or you've talked about, is our AK20 cartridge system. This replaces everything inside of both forks. The bike bolts up stock, looks stock. Everything fits exactly as it was delivered. The anti-dive system is no longer used because no oil passes through it anymore with this. The only irreversibly modified thing is we have to grind the stuff out of the left fork tube. So it's basically bolts up for the most part. It's a straight ahead thing. Hopefully some of you got to see our machine shop today. We make all of this, almost every piece of this right here in our shop. Tried for a long time to get people to make just even little parts for me, and I got crappy parts and they were delivered whenever people got around to it. And I just went crazy, and I ended up and finally bought a machine and hired a programmer, and we've been moving forward ever since. I tried to build this product for 5 years without my own machinery, and it took me 5 months after I bought a machine and hired a guy to do it. So definitely we have absolute total control over our process here. No corner cut in the manufacturing of this, and I get to ensure that because it's my machines and my guys. So we get in there and do it our way. All the sliding parts are hard coat anodized. So this is one of the key things. Aluminum parts rubbing on aluminum puts contamination in the fork oil. There's nothing here that will ever disappear. Hard coat anodized is so hard you have to scratch it before you can even drill through it. It's very hard. So the rods are centerless ground. The tolerance, just to give you some numbers, or just to give you an idea of what the length we've gone to, are held to a tolerance of 1/2 of a thousandth of an inch. a sheet of paper is 4/1000ths of an inch. That means the variance over this rod, the maximum, is 1/8 the thickness of a sheet of paper. All right? We've done the exact same tolerance in the bore. It's honed of the main body. And so this is for perfect, smooth, consistent damping, and they're very, very slick surfaces. So there's no drag in the system. And then past that, we've made the rod so that I designed it so it articulates. So that's another cause of bushing failure in the rod. When this bushing fails, the cartridge will leak, and then the fork loses damping, right? So Goldwings with high miles on them, that cartridge leaks, and they only get worse damping, even if you change the oil. So we've eliminated that possibility. And then the next thing, if you remember, one of the keys to contamination, I was telling you, springs drop metal down into the oil. We have a special spring system we call the Omni Spring, and it's a thinner spring. Our spring isn't guided by the tube like these, as you can see there. Our spring is guided by an internal nylon buffer, we call a spring buffer. And so the spring doesn't touch the wall of the fork anymore. So there's no way for it to drop nothing rubbing on it for it to drop in the oil. So, and what we're trying to do is, again, we're not trying to extend service intervals per se, because in this case, we know the bushings are going to wear out in 20,000 miles. So it's not we're trying to extend it, we're trying to make the performance consistent over that whole 20,000 miles. Now, cartridges are sensitive to debris getting in them. They're very special valves, small valves, and any debris can cause a little valve to hang open and you lose a little bit of damping force. So to have the stuff be really clean all the time is really key. So we've done everything possible to stop that from happening. And the results have been good. We had 3 people that all had 25 or 30,000 miles on their bikes here this week that we'd already done the kit, and we were able to get in them and see what people stacking miles on. Motorcycle Mom and Charles. Where's Charles at? There he is. He had 30,000 or something on his. So we were pleased to see everything's still perfect inside. So we're happy about that. This kit with springs and everything is $1,000, $999.95, and it's $150 to install it. We're working diligently and daily right now to set up dealers around America. So if you guys have friends or a dealer that you know that in your own states, we really appreciate recommendations and get them to give us a ring. We try and get people to be here. We won't let them install our kit unless they come and spend a day with us. We figure if they're that committed, or they'll make that commitment, we want to know that everything's done perfectly. We've really gone a long way to protect the brand, protect our brand by always having perfect installations and it's close in perfect performance if we can provide it. What happens when you put this in? Well, there's our kit restores wheel travel. The bike won't sag as far under its own weight. This kit's designed to soak bumps, and the way we do that without it being harsh is what we call a digressive damping curve. You remember earlier I was telling you about a progressive damping curve looks like. If we have force and velocity, this is force and velocity. If you have a hole, an orifice, if the oil moves slowly, you get little or no force. If the oil moves fast, you get an exponential amount of force. You actually get a lot, and that's where you can get a spike. Our cartridge is designed, the pistons and shims and everything inside it are designed to work in what we call a digressive fashion. And so what we're able to do is generate lots of low-speed damping. This makes the bike feel firm and controlled to you. You get a lot of feedback from the tires. The chassis doesn't float or move. And feedback is confidence in your hand, and it gives you a mental connection to the tires on the ground, and that gives you confidence. And confidence is you want to feel secure and safe while you're riding your bike. We take away the high-speed damping. High speed meaning the speed the shaft is moving. So if you hit a bump, our system has way less damping. So that's what allows it to blow off. Like if you bump into a curb or you hit a pothole or you're hitting little sharp ripple bumps coming to a stoplight. So by doing this style of damping, we're able to make a bike that, even though it sounds opposite, feels firm, but yet soaks bumps. And so this level of control, people will notice right away, and the way the bike turns, the way the bike handles and responds while it's leaned over. They notice they stop dragging their footboards and dragging the undercarriage of the bike if you happen to ride with that level of aggressiveness. On the shock, it's non-rebuildable as it's delivered from Honda. Here's the whole contraption. unfortunately, we have a hard time. You can't buy any part of this. You have to buy all of it. That's Honda's thing. This is the electronic preload adjuster. This is the part that people are familiar. If your bike won't, if you don't have the full range of adjustment on the rear spring, it's because this system has air in it. And so you might push your numbers and it might go up 6, 7, 8, 9 before the bike even starts moving. The shock as delivered from Honda is non-rebuildable. It's gas charged, but it's built in a sealed environment. So we actually drill into it and let the pressure out, and then we put in a special fitting that we've made that allows us to recharge the shock with a needle and makes it rebuildable into the future. All the shocks, we take them all the way apart, everything's stripped, cleaned, and new seals, everything internally inside. We modify the stock piston to increase the flow. This is the shock piston from inside the shock. And we modify this, make the ports larger so that it'll flow more oil. Again, trying to take away some of this bad stuff here. We want it to be more like this. So then we restack all of what they call valving washers on it. Every shock's tested on our dyno, which maybe you saw in there. Shock dynamometer is a gizmo. We put a shock into it and it cycles it, and then we get a computer readout that tells us how much force it creates, and we know if it's good or bad or in the right ranges. So every shock's tested. Then we fit a spring to it with a special spacer that puts a preload in just the right range. And we find that people, once they've got our entire shock system on, most people don't ride with it past 10, even heavily loaded, and with a passenger. Some people ride at 0 as we give it back to them. Seems that kind of the average is around 7. There's definitely no need to crank the thing up to 25 anymore. The shock, as far as the maintenance goes, it'll go twice the distance of the forks, you know, so what I would suggest is at 40,000 you have the shock serviced again as well. It's in a sealed gas charged environment, and so there's not really much in it to contaminate it. The steel body on them is something Honda did that's good. We've never seen one with any wear in it. 100,000 miles. The body of the shock is solid. They don't wear at all. That part's good. No major things about the shock that I can tell you are bad and fail and wear out, sort of like the bushings and things in the fork do. So the net outcome of us putting the shock on, when we do the shock and the fork as a kit, then the spring rates are matched, the bike is balanced, and people find that the bike rides plusher, and even to the point of, we've had the old problem of fellas want to get their bike upgraded, but they don't want their wife to know because they don't know they spent the money, right? So they secretly, we've had people secretly slip the shock on and have their wife say, "What'd you do to the bike? Because it's not jolting me in the butt anymore," you know. And so then the guy's able to sort of, you know, say, "Well, I bought a shock for the bike," you know. And so it's really interesting that the passengers are equally as sensitive to the pilots. And, you know, certainly if you're going to ride 20,000 miles or 30,000 miles a year as a passenger, you're going to know what that bike does right and wrong. You're going to have a great sensitivity to its pluses and its minuses. So steering head bearings, very common thing. People have heard of the All Balls is the name brand that people tend to buy. It's a tapered roller bearing. The stock bearing from Honda is a series of single actual roller balls, little steel balls. That system is good only in the respect that